Geopolitics, elections, and central banks cutting rates. 2024 had a lot for FX markets, but what will 2025 look like for the main currencies? This is the year ahead at XM.com. I'm Cristina Marujos, and with me is our lead market analyst, Rafi Boyajian. So, Rafi, let's start with the United States. There's, without a doubt, the fact that the dollar is heading into 2025 dynamically, with its main tailwinds being a strong U.S. economy and, of course, the upcoming new Trump administration. But what might be some tailwinds the greenback could face in the new year?
Well, Christina, let's first of all point out the dollar's resurgence, which has been driven, of course, by the expectation that newly elected President Trump's policies will be inflationary. We know that both Trump and the Republicans want to cut taxes, and with the GOP controlling both chambers of Congress, tax cuts are almost certainly on the way. The one uncertainty here is whether tax cuts will coincide with spending cuts. So it's possible that the tax giveaways may not be so inflationary after all. So this is one headwind for the current bullish expectations. Trump's, of course, other big campaign pledge is higher tariffs. He has already said he will slap 25% tariffs on Mexico and Canada, and this is likely to be a taste of what's to come. Surprisingly, he's announced just 10% tariffs on Chinese imports. Maybe he's conscious of stoking inflation and also not enraging the Chinese too much before coming into office. It's still very likely, though, that more tariff decisions will be made in Trump's first few months as president. Nevertheless, it does suggest that Trump does not want to be too reckless with tariffs, and this is encouraging for global trade, but maybe not so much for the dollar, as it means the Fed should still be able to cut rates in 2025. The problem for the Fed, however, is that inflation has been surprising to the upside even before Trump's policies have taken effect. The inflation picture should definitely keep the dollar on the front foot in the early parts of 2025. But if then we see inflation coming down faster than anticipated, the Fed will not hesitate to cut rates more aggressively, and so a weaker dollar is certainly a possibility in the second half of 2025.
Interesting. Now, let's cross into Japan. 2024 has been a roller coaster for the yen. We've seen it hit multi-decade lows, especially against the US dollar, and then staging an impressive rebound. So what does 2025 look like for the Japanese yen?
Well, the good news for the yen is that it has recovered from near 4-decade lows, and markets are more convinced than ever that the Bank of Japan means business, shall we say, when it says it wants to hike rates. What markets are not convinced about, though, is how many further rate hikes are in store. Because although inflation in Japan is holding for now above 2%, economic growth hasn't been that great. Wages aren't rising as fast as policymakers would like, so there's no urgency to raise rates aggressively. The thing to remember, though, is that interest rates in Japan are still nevertheless very low, and as a result, real rates have remained negative despite those rate hikes. This gives the BOJ plenty of scope to hike further over the coming year should it stick to its tightening path. And let's not forget that yen is a safe haven currency, and there is plenty of geopolitical uncertainty at the moment that's not going to go away anytime soon. So this should also keep the yen supported in the coming months.
Now let's cross into the euro area. It has been plagued by political crises and, of course, weak growth for 2024. So can we be optimistic about the single currency in the new year?
Well, the Euro's woes never seem to end, and the political situation in both France and Germany certainly adds a different element when it comes to the outlook, and it complicates the ECB's job of setting interest rates. But whilst we should be careful about becoming too gloomy about the prospects for the Eurozone economy, the risks are clearly tilted to the downside, and it's likely to remain this way for probably the first half of 2025. If at some point in 2025 the ECB is done cutting rates, but the Fed has more to go, we could see things turn around for the euro. But for the moment, the lack of leadership within the EU, the possibility of a budget crisis in France, and the absence of a fiscal stimulus in Germany are enough to drag the euro all the way down to parity against the US dollar. Not to mention, of course, that inflation in the Eurozone is less of a problem than it is in the United States, so this alone is keeping the euro on the back foot.
Now, arguably, the pound has shown incredible resilience in 2024, but walking into 2025, its outlook is a bit murkier. We still have the big unknown, which is, of course, the UK budget. So what could markets anticipate with sterling this year?
Well, yeah, the pound is definitely an interesting one because it was the best performing major currency apart from the dollar in 2024, and it could retain that title in 25 as well, but maybe for the wrong reasons. Whereas in 2024, it was the stronger than expected economic performance that kept the Bank of England on the hawkish side in 25. It's likely to be concerns of a resurgence in inflationary pressures, and this comes on the back of the new Labour government's tax and spend budget, which you mentioned, which risks pushing up inflation both directly by higher government spending and indirectly by forcing businesses to put up their prices to pay for the higher taxes that has been imposed on them. Now, it's possible that inflation could still come in below expectations, and maybe the BOE could therefore cut rates a bit quicker than what investors are currently pricing in. But even then, downside for sterling will be limited, at least from domestic policies, and whether we'll see it reach the 1.20 level again against the US dollar depends more on how much further the dollar rallies. However, if inflation becomes a major problem for the BOE and less so for the Fed later in 2025, the pound could revisit its 2024 highs above 1.34.
I see. Rafi, it was great having you with me today. Thanks so much. This was the year ahead for the FX market here at XM.com.